Hello students, today we will discuss about a new theory of international relations called Constructivism, and this theory is different from the earlier mainstream theories such as liberalism, Marxism and new realism or realism for that matter. The main point on the basis of which Constructivism is different from the mainstream theories is that Constructivism basically focuses on the role of identity, role of ideas, role of perceptions, role of values, and it focuses basically on the ideational factors, whereas the mainstream theories they basically talked about the material factors. So that is the point on the basis of which you can differentiate Constructivism from the earlier mainstream theories. So what we will do is first we will discuss about the background of this theory, and then we will talk about the conceptual vocabulary of this theory, because that will help us for further understanding of Constructivism as a new theory of international relations. So let us start with the background of this theory. Even though some scholars define Constructivism as an approach, understanding or a perspective, not a theory of international relations, it has become firmly established within the spectrum of international relations theories. So many till recently many scholars didn't consider Constructivism a new theory or an alternative theory, but it was basically understood as an approach, an understanding or a perspective. Despite its relatively short history in the field of international relations, Constructivism became very popular first among the North American higher scholars, and it later spread to other parts of the world. So it has not a very long history like liberalism, like realism or Marxism, but during the early 1990s particularly, the arguments of Constructivism was so popular, although it started with the North American scholars, but it later spread to other parts of the world. Writings of Nicholas Onoff, who first coined the term in his book The World of War Making, and Alexander Wendt first these two writers first introduced Constructivism to the discipline of international relations. So there were so many, it is not that there was no work on Constructivism before these two scholars, but they were the first who introduced Constructivism as a separate theory in international relations. Among all the constructivist higher theorists, however, Alexander Wendt stands out as one of the most popular figure in this theory. So so his writings particularly are more important for understanding Constructivism as a separate theory of international relations, along with the writings of Nicholas Onoff. Since the first appearance in international relations in the late 1980s, Constructivism has evolved significantly, and different versions of Constructivism particularly emerged, such as neoclassical Constructivism, postmodern and naturalistic Constructivism. So the point is there is not a single theory of international relations. These are different varieties of Constructivism, but they basically focused on some other issues, unlike the Constructivism which we are talking about in international relations. Despite mainly diverging on epistemological and methodological issues on the one hand and on the level of analysis on the other, all of these theories share the basic assumption on structure and the agent structure problem in international relations, and the formation of state identities, interest and preferences on the other. So there are different varieties of Constructivism, but they are all and they have also differences on the issue of methodology, on the issue of epistemological concerns. But despite those differences, they share a common concern about three things: their assumption about social structure, the agent structure issue in the international relations, and the formation of state identities, interest and preference on the other. So these are the issues on the basis of which these three varieties of Constructivism they are united. The concern is with the making and remaking of the world, because it underscores Constructivism's strong interest in global change. So how the world is made, how it is remade, and how it is leading to change and progress, of course for transformation, that is their main concern. So unlike the realist theory, which was basically a status quo theory, so Constructivism differs from realism, and it focuses on the issues of global change or global transformation. Now let us talk about the conceptual vocabulary of Constructivism, because that will help us to understand the general assumptions about Constructivism in a much better way. Constructivism is about human consciousness and its role in international life. So, they start with this issue of human consciousness and how human consciousness helps us to understand the working of international relations. This focus on human consciousness suggests a commitment to idealism and holism, which represent the core of constructivism. So, this kind of commitment for human consciousness, and when you focus on human consciousness, it basically means that you are committed to the role of ideas and to holism that represent the core of constructivism. Idealism demands that we take seriously the role of ideas in world politics. So, as I said in the beginning that this theory is different from other theories because it speaks about the role of ideas and how the ideas can be instrumental in changing the world or changing world politics. The balance of power, for example, doesn't objectively exist somewhere else or waiting to be discovered. Instead, states debate the meaning of the balance of power and how they should respond. So, if you take the example of balance of power, so it is not something not something hidden, something to be discovered, something to be invented or reinvented. Rather, it's a kind of perception that how you understand the meaning of balance of power, and if that is the case, then how you would respond. Constructivism also accepts some form of holism or structuralism, which emphasizes that agents have some autonomy and their interactions help to construct, reproduce and transform those structures. So, constructivism is basically talking of the role of the structures and role of agents in the structure, and the agents have some sort of autonomy, they have some sort of agency because their interactions help to construct, reproduce and transform the social structures. So, unlike neorealism that focuses on structure that is beyond the control of the human beings, so constructivism particularly differs from neorealism, and it thinks that the kind of interactions the agents have with the structure, that is important, how the individuals are playing an important role in or interacting with the structure, how the states are interacting with the structure. So, that is much more important. So, agency structure relationship is much important for constructivist theory than we understood that in case of neorealism. Although the structure of the Cold War seemingly locked the United States and the Soviet Union into an ideological rivalry, leaders on both sides creatively transformed their relations and with them the very structure of global politics. So, structure is not independent, it is based on the interaction of the agents like state like individuals. So, if you take the example of Cold War, it provided a kind of rigid structure and it affected the way international politics was functioning for last 50-60 years, but it is ultimately the role of the individuals, particularly Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan and many other presidents who succeeded him. They had made a good contribution for ending the Cold War, and that changed the very structure of global politics. So, the point is structure is important, so also the role of the actors, the role of the agency, because the actors are in fact according to this theory they are much more important than the structure, unlike the neo-realist understanding of structure. The core observation that social construction of reality. So, structure is basically socially constructed, that is the main point. This has a number of related elements, and one is the emphasis on the socially constructed nature of actors and their identities and interests. So, the end of the Cold War, due to the role of the individual leaders that established this fact that there is a social construction of reality. So, the structures are not independent, rather they are constructed by the actors and how the actors understand their identity and interest that matters more than the material factors. So, here the role of agency is much more important than the structure. The Indian identity, for example, as the largest democratic country of the world, shapes its national interest and the acceptance and unacceptable means to achieve them. So, if you take the example of India, for instance, the perception that India is the world's largest democratic country, that shapes its interest, that shapes its foreign policy goals, and that also makes it different how India would accept and use acceptable and means for foreign policy and what it should not accept, or what are the unacceptable means to achieve them. So, as a democratic country, you have to differentiate that whether your foreign policy is basically based to support authoritarian regime, or will it support democracy. So, that you have to make, and accordingly you have to choose your foreign policy goals. Another element is how knowledge that is associated with symbols, rules, concepts and categories shapes individual construction and interpretation of their world. So, the point is it is this understanding, this knowledge shapes the individual's construction and interpretation of their world. So, how you interpret the world, what is happening? Are you thinking of joining a particular bloc? Are you thinking of avoiding a particular bloc? Are you thinking that the unipolar is good for you? Are you thinking that the bipolar world would serve your interest? Are you thinking that multipolar world is beneficial for you? So, this is all your perception, this is all your knowledge, and this is all important for understanding the world events. Reality is not just out there waiting to be discovered. Instead, historically produced and culturally bound knowledge enables the individuals to construct and give meaning to reality. So, it is not something waiting to be discovered, rather how you produce that knowledge, what is the role of history, and you consider those experiences, those perceptions that as important, and it is also a cultural bound knowledge that enables the individual to construct. So, here the culture, the history, they are all important. In a particular period we considered Nehru's foreign policy as good, but nowadays the very premises of Nehruvianism in India's foreign policy is questioned, because we are talking of a different context. So, in that context maybe Nehruvian foreign policy was important and that was relevant for India, but not now, because the world has changed, and so also India's foreign policy should change. So, the point is how these kind of things are historically produced, and what is the role of culture, what is the role of knowledge, these things are important for the construction and understanding of the social structure. Brute facts such as rocks, flower, gravity, oceans exist independently of human agreement and will continue to exist even if the human beings disappear. So, you have to make a difference between the natural science facts and the social facts. Social facts are different from natural science, that the natural science facts like the rocks, the flowers, the gravity or the ocean, they exist independently of human relationship or human agreement, but the social facts they would be there, and they greatly influence your understanding, your belief, your identity. Social facts depend on human agreement and are taken for granted. So, when you understand something socially, that needs broader kind of agreement, and then when everybody agrees, or at least most of the people agree for a particular thing, that is taken for granted, such as refugees, terrorism, human rights, sovereignty issue, they are all social facts, they are all based on social understanding. So, earlier we talked about terrorism in a different language, now we talk of terrorism in a different language, countries talk about terrorism in a different language, America used to tell about terrorism in a different language before 9/11, but now it has a different understanding. The Indians, they also understand terrorism in a different way, and Pakistan is what the Indians understand, Pakistanis understand the issue of terrorism in a very different way. We consider those who use in violence, those who indulge in violence in Kashmir, Northeast, or maybe the Naxalite, we consider them as terrorists, but those who are fighting in Kashmir, they are understood as freedom fighters by Pakistan. Same is the case with Taliban. We consider Taliban as something very dangerous kind of organization, because it doesn't respect human rights, it doesn't give equality to women, it makes discrimination, so many other issues are there. But the Pakistanis, they will make a distinction between good Taliban and bad Taliban, and they consider those Talibani elements who target India as good Taliban, and those who target Pakistan, they are the bad Taliban. So, it is all based on your perception. So, it is equally correct for other issues like refugees, like sovereignty, and so many other facts, because all these issues are socially constructed based on our experience, based on our knowledge, based on our perception. So, we cannot ignore the importance of these forces. They will only exist so long as human agreement endures, and their existence shapes how we categorize the world and what to do with them. So, today's perception may change, tomorrow you may think these issues in a very different way. So it goes on, because your understanding, your perception, your knowledge, everything changes along with major events, along with your exposure, along with your knowledge, along with your good or bad experience. In contrast to neo-realists who often speak of state behavior, constructivists frequently use the language of practices which suggests that there is a proper way of doing something. So unlike the neo-realists who basically focus on state behavior, constructivists, they frequently talk of the language of practices, particularly what you have to do, how you have to do, what are the proper way of doing something, what are the things you should avoid. So these kind of language of practices, that's very important for understanding international politics. Say for instance, humanitarian organizations that provide life-saving relief to victims of conflict and natural disasters have a set of clear-cut practices. There are right things and there are wrong ways to deliver the relief. So if you think of Red Cross, if you think of some other international aid giving institutions, they have their standard practices. They know what they have to do and what to avoid. For example, they always operate on the principles of impartiality, independence and neutrality. So for them it is not the state government, or it is not the people who are the organizations or the leaders, they are not important for them. They want to serve the humanity, and even if the soldiers are injured, the civilians are injured, anybody else is injured, so they don't make a difference between civilian and the soldiers, something like that. So for them, if somebody is a victim, if somebody is injured, so they need their support and they provide them the support. The constructivists also are concerned with norms and rules. Rules come into two types of varieties, such as regulative rules, such as the WTO's rules regarding trade, and constitutive rules, such as various rules used in the game. And they particularly talk that if there is a change in the game rules, that may affect the result of the game, the outcome of the game. So in that way, they make a difference between two kinds of rules, regulatory rules and the constitutive rules. The rules of sovereignty not only regulate state practices but also make possible for the idea of sovereign state. So these kind of practices, these kind of rules, they are all important because they help us to regulate something, they help us to understand something. So that is how they are all important in international politics. Rules also vary in terms of their institutionalization, which means that they can vary over time. So we would be concerned about their origin, evolution and corresponding effects. So it's not the fact that rules exist, but if they are better institutionalized, that is more important, and that's why we have to understand the institutionalization of these rules through their origin, through their evolution and their effects. Furthermore, rules are not static. They are revised through practices, reflection and arguments by knowledgeable actors regarding how they should be applied to new situations. So rules, once they are fixed, or you can change them, it all depends on the changing nature of the rules, changing nature of the practices, because sometimes your perception changes, your reflection changes, your practices changes, and also the role of the scholars, the role of knowledgeable actors, they are all important to understand the role of rules in the new situation, in the new context. Human rights activists, for instance, try to encourage compliance with human rights norms, not only by naming and shaming those who violate these rules. They also encourage states to identify with the norms because it is the right thing to do. So if you take the example of the human rights organizations like Amnesty International and others, they not only just try to make the states to comply with human rights norm through naming and shaming, they also tried that more and more states should, out of their consent, they should implement those human rights laws, conform their domestic political system to the international standard practices on human rights, and that shows that norms are, once they are accepted, it's not that they are permanent, they will not be changed, rather they change from time to time. Earlier nobody thought about these human rights organizations before 30 years, before 40 years, because if you try to intervene in others' issues on the name of human rights, that was strongly protested, that was strongly resisted, because many considered that that violates your state sovereignty. But now things are changing. All countries, including China, including other authoritarian countries, they are all worried about the human rights record, the kinds of their record, particularly on different rights, on democracy, on functioning of the international organizations, whether they allow aid giving institutions or not, what kind of policies they are following for their own citizens. So these are all now important, and all states, including the totalitarian and authoritarian countries, they take the arguments, they take about this violation issue very seriously. Constructivists claim that the world is not just material but also normative, because it leads them to contrast different kinds of world order. So basic argument of the constructivist, as I said in the beginning, they are not just concerned about the material factor, they also consider that the world is also composed of normative factors, and that led to them to differently understand different kind of world order. So on the basis of this normative ideals, normative factors, you can understand different kind of world orders. The realists begin with the world of anarchy, defined by the absence of a supranational authority, which cause a kind of state action with suspicion, rivalry and conflict. We have already discussed that how the realist and the neo-realist, they are talking of anarchy, and how this kind of absence of supranational authority at the global level causes the state to behave in a very suspicious and confrontational way. But would a world of Mahatma Gandhi would be the same as the world of Osama bin Laden? So that is the question posed by the constructivists, because there may be different kind of world models. Gandhian model may be different from Mao's model of world, or maybe Osama bin Laden's model may be different from all others. So the point is so there is not a single model. So if you just focus on the role of international structure, you are talking of just one model, that is that model based on anarchy. But that is not correct, because here you will find different kind of models based on individual perceptions, based on the beliefs, based on interactions, based on identity. The existence of different normative environments points to a central concern called legitimacy. So basically the kind of different models, or the understanding about different models basically takes us to the question of legitimacy. All actors crave legitimacy, the belief that they are acting according to and pursuing the values of a broader international community. So basically legitimacy is based on the perception that you are conforming to international law, your behavior is conforming to the values of international society for reasons of identity and interest. Because if you identify yourself with international law, if you believe in international law, if you follow international law, that is beneficial for your identity, that is also beneficial for your interest. There is a direct relationship between their legitimacy and the cost of a course of action. The greater the legitimacy is, it is easier to convince others to cooperate with their policies. The less the legitimacy is, the most costly the state action may be. The point is, if you are following a kind of particular policy, if your that policy conforms to international law, if that is based on international law, most of the other countries would support you. And if you violate international law, nobody will support you, or many would prefer to be silent. If you look at the Russia-Ukraine war, you will find that most of the people they supported Ukraine because they thought that Ukraine is right, because it, as a sovereign state, it has the right to decide whether it would be a member of NATO or not. But Russia cannot dictate the policies or the choices of Ukraine. So the point is, if you formulate your policy based on international law, based on legitimacy, so others would definitely support you, or at least if they don't support you, they will not criticize you, because that gives you legitimacy. Such considerations help explain, when challenged by human rights activists through naming and shaming tactics, how many law-breaking governments change their behavior so that they are seen as law-abiding actors, law-abiding citizens. So if most of the countries nowadays, they are concerned about their human rights record, they are concerned about international criticism, they are concerned about international opinion, because you cannot ignore international opinion, you cannot ignore the concerns of others, and you say because I am a sovereign country or we are living in a sovereign country, so we will behave whatever way we like. So that time has gone, that time is over. The distinction between constitutive and regulative rules parallel the conceptual distinction between the logic of consequence and the logic of appropriateness. So you can understand the logic of consequence, because that may be a costly factor for you, for your country, and the logic of appropriateness, that is based on legitimacy. So most of the countries are now following the policy of appropriateness rather than the logic of consequence, because ultimately that would be problematic for you, that will not get you to get international support. The US decision to invade Iraq in 2003 without the support of the United Nations Security Council meant that other states viewed the US actions as illegitimate and were less willing to support them. This raised the cost to the United States when it went ahead. The issue is, because when USA decided to invade Iraq in 2003, earlier wanted to make its action more appropriate or legitimate, because it made it clear that Saddam Hussein is developing nuclear bombs, and there is a need to prevent such kind of activities, because that is dangerous for the world. It is a different thing that you possess those weapons and you do not consider it dangerous for others. The point is, so USA was first guided by the logic of appropriateness, but it faced the consequences of, or the logic of consequence, because when it was proved that there was no military program or nuclear program by Saddam Hussein, so nobody supported it, and most of the actors they considered as illegitimate, and that is why it raised severe cost to the US foreign policy. Even it was also costly for America to invade Afghanistan. So the point is, in some way, you have to think about the logic of appropriateness rather than the logic of consequence. Otherwise, the consequence would be very costly for you. By emphasizing the social construction of reality and questioning how the world is put together, constructivists become archaeologists of the existing world, as they want to understand the origin of the social construct that now appear to us as natural and as part of our social vocabulary. The point is, so if you want to understand how the world actually operates, so you have to understand the social construction of reality, how reality is constructed, how it is socially constructed, and question how the world is put together. So it is not that the world is only following the logic of anarchy, it's international structure, so they are all one-sided view, because if you focus on the role of the social construction of reality, according to the constructivist, that provides you the better model how the world actually operates and what is the origin of the social construct, that you do not consider anything as natural, as given or something like God given. They are not balance of power is not God given, preemptive strike is not God given, or the concept of anarchy is not God given, they are all socially constructed. So if you consider this factor, then your understanding of international politics would be different, and rather it gives you a better analytical framework. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far about constructivism. In spite of a relatively short history, constructivism has become a very popular theory in international relations. We also discussed that despite mainly diverging on epistemology and methodology, all varieties of constructivism share some basic assumptions on the agent structure problem and the formation of state identities, interests and preferences that shape the international system. Constructivism uses a specific conceptual vocabulary to analyze and explain the role of ideas, norms, identities and social interactions in shaping international politics. In the next lecture, we will discuss the remaining portion of the key concepts, summarize the main points covered and focus on Alexander Wendt's views on constructivism. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you once again.